My name is Samantha Price, and I'm 22 years old. After my first big career win in Albuquerque, I came home excited, imagining warm smiles and proud congratulations. But instead, I was met with a scene that took my breath away. My clothes stuffed tightly into garbage bags and dumped at our front gate. My dad stood there, his eyes cold, his voice sharp as a blade. "You're 22 now. It's time you stood on your own and moved out." Beside him, my older brother stood with his arms crossed, nodding as if they had rehearsed this moment together. My heart pounded, but I smiled a smile that wasn't joy, but a silent challenge. They had planned this, waiting until I was away to erase me from their lives. Without a word, I grabbed my laptop bag, slid into my car, and drove off, their voices still echoing in my head. 3 months later, my phone lit up 44 calls and one desperate text from my mom. "Where are you? What had changed? Why did they suddenly need me now? If you were in my shoes, would you go back? Or keep walking for good?" Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. I grew up in Sherman Hill, Des Moines, in a home where every room seemed to echo my parents' expectations. Dad Richard Price ran a small accounting firm with a temper as sharp as his ledgers. Mom Linda Price worked part-time as a librarian, her quiet demeanor hiding a knack for cutting remarks. Then there was my older brother James Price, 6 years ahead of me, their shining star. By 28, James was a software engineer with a downtown condo and a fiancée. They adored his name, a constant hymn at family dinners. I was the shadow trailing behind the kid who never quite fit their mold. Choosing a coding job at a startup in East Village over a corporate desk made me their disappointment, the one who dared stray from their script. Dad's voice carried a familiar edge every Sunday as he carved the roast. "James is leading projects now," he'd say, glancing at me. "Why can't you aim that high?" Mom would chime in, her tone softer, but no less biting. "Your brother's already settled with a real career." I'd grip my fork, forcing a nod while my stomach twisted. My startup job wasn't glamorous, long hours debugging code for an app barely off the ground, but it was mine, a gamble I believed in. I'd graduated from Drake University with a computer science degree, but my parents saw my student loans as a failure, not a reality. James, of course, had a scholarship, his path paved with their praise. "You need to step up," Dad said once, pointing at me across the table. I wanted to argue that my 50-hour weeks were proof of effort, but their eyes were always on James. Living at home was my only option after college. Des Moines rent prices were brutal, and my entry-level salary couldn't cover an apartment plus my $30,000 loan. I paid $300 a month to my parents, stocked the fridge with groceries, and spent weekends mowing the lawn or driving Mom to her book club when her car sputtered. None of it mattered. To them, I was the kid leeching off their generosity, not the one keeping the house running. "You're still here?" James asked one night, smirking as he grabbed a beer from the fridge. He rarely visited, but when he did, Mom and Dad lit up, hanging on his stories of coding breakthroughs or his fiancée's perfect dinner parties. My updates, fixing a bug or pitching a new feature, were met with blank stares or a quick change of subject. Dad's control went beyond words. He had opinions on my friends, my clothes, even the hours I kept. "You're wasting time with those startup types," he'd snap, scrolling through his phone while I cooked dinner. Mom was no better, texting me if I stayed out past 10, demanding to know who I was with. Friends my age were renting lofts, dating without curfews, building lives free of judgment. I envied their independence, but I was stuck tied to a family that measured my worth against James's resume. "You need to take life seriously," Mom said once, handing me a stack of dishes to scrub. I wanted to scream that I was coding through nights, saving every penny, but their expectations were a wall I couldn't climb. James was more than their favorite. He was their future. They'd talk endlessly about his plans for a tech startup, an app they believed would revolutionize something vague but grand. Dad's eyes would spark when James pitched his ideas, tossing out terms like venture capital over coffee. "That's my boy," he'd say, clapping James on the shoulder. My ideas, new features for our app, ways to boost user engagement never got a second glance. Once I overheard Mom and Dad in the living room, their voices low as they discussed investments for James's future. "It's a big opportunity," Mom whispered. I caught Dad nodding, saying, "We'll make it work." The secrecy unnerved me. Why were they so guarded? Why did my questions about our finances get brushed off with, "It's not your concern"? The constant comparisons carved out pieces of me. Growing up, James was the high school star debate captain valedictorian, the kid who could do no wrong. I was the one who loved coding for the puzzle of it, not the prestige, but my B grades, and unconventional choices were flaws in their eyes. When I picked Drake over a prestigious school, Mom sighed. "Your brother aimed higher." When I took the startup job, Dad shook his head. "You're throwing away stability." Every step I took was judged against James's path, and I was always lacking. I tried to win their approval, fixing their Wi-Fi, paying rent on time, but it was like shouting into a void. Their love was conditional, and I was failing the test. The worst nights were when James visited his presence, turning our home into a shrine to his success. Mom would set out her best dishes, Dad would crack open a bottle of wine, and they'd listen as James talked about his latest project or his fiancé's promotion. I'd sit there pushing peas around my plate, knowing my turn to speak would be ignored. "Samantha's still at that startup," Mom said once, her tone dripping with pity. James smirked. "Still chasing dreams, huh?" I wanted to tell them about the feature I'd coded, the one our users loved, but the conversation moved on back to James. Those moments burned a reminder that I was the outsider in my own family, the one who'd never measure up. My bedroom with its creaky floorboards and faded curtains was my only refuge in a house that felt more like a battleground. I stayed there to keep my head above water, juggling loan payments that ate up half my paycheck from the startup in East Village. My coding job was a grind, late nights, debugging apps, racing against deadlines to outpace bigger firms. I loved the chaos, the thrill of turning lines of code into something users needed. Last week, I'd fixed a crash that saved our demo, earning a nod from my boss. "You're clutch, Samantha," he said, his grin a rare spark of validation. I carried that home, hoping just once my family might notice. Instead, I got silence, or worse, Dad's eye rolls, Mom's shrugs, James's snide texts. Money was a constant knot in my stomach. My student loans demanded $300 a month, and unexpected costs like a cracked phone screen or new work shoes forced me to skip meals out or cut corners. I'd sit at my desk crunching numbers, praying my car wouldn't break down. One night, I asked Mom if I could borrow $50 for a software license I needed for work. "You should have planned better," she said, flipping through her magazine without looking up. "James always has his finances in order." I bit my tongue, paid for it with my credit card, and watched my debt creep higher. Their refusal to help wasn't just about money, it was a message I wasn't worth investing in. At the startup, I was proving myself. Our team was small, maybe 10 of us, working out of a cramped office with mismatched chairs and endless coffee. I was tasked with optimizing our app's search function, a project that could make or break our next funding round. I'd stay until midnight, eyes burning, tweaking algorithms until they hummed. When I got it right, our user engagement spiked by 15%. My boss emailed the team, "Samantha's work is pushing us forward." I printed that email, tucked it in my bag, and brought it home, thinking maybe Dad would care. Over dinner, I slid it across the table. "My project's doing well," I said, my voice steady. Dad skimmed it, then pushed it back. "That's not a career," he said, cutting his steak. "You need something stable like James." Mom was no better. She'd sit in the living room scrolling through photos of James's latest trip with his fiancée, cooing over their perfect life. I'd try to share my own wins, like streamlining our app's code, but she'd nod absently, then change the subject. "Did you see James's new client?" she asked once, holding up her phone to show his LinkedIn post. I forced a smile, my chest tight. I wasn't asking for praise, just a moment of acknowledgement, but even that was too much. Their indifference made every late night at work feel heavier, like I was fighting a battle they'd already decided I'd lost. James's disdain hit differently. He didn't need to visit to make me feel small, he'd do it from miles away. One afternoon, I posted about our app's latest update on social media, proud of my work. Within an hour, James commented, "Cute hobby, Sam. When are you getting a real job?" His words public for my friends and coworkers to see burned. I deleted the post, my face hot with shame. Later, I texted him asking why he had to say it like that. "Just keeping it real," he replied with a winking emoji. I stared at my phone, wondering how my brother could be so cruel, so casual about it. His success was a spotlight. I was just the shadow it cast. The pressure wasn't just emotional. Dad started asking me to cover random household bills, electricity, internet, saying it was only fair since I lived there. One month, he handed me a $500 utility bill, claiming it was my share. "James doesn't burden us like this," he said, his tone sharp. I paid it, dipping into my savings, knowing I couldn't argue. My budget was stretched thin, every dollar accounted for, but they acted like I was freeloading. I started tracking expenses on a spreadsheet, cutting out anything non-essential. No new clothes, no streaming subscriptions, just work and bills. It felt like survival, not living. Work kept me sane, but it was a pressure cooker. Our startup was in a race against a rival app, and every day was a sprint to stay ahead. I'd volunteer for extra tasks, testing features, writing documentation, hoping to secure my spot if we got funding. My boss noticed, assigning me lead on a new feature. "You've got this," he said, trusting me with more than my family ever did. But the stakes were high. One mistake could cost us the client, and my loans meant I couldn't afford to lose this job. I'd come home exhausted, only to face Dad's lectures about wasting my potential or Mom's sighs when I mentioned work. I started pulling away, skipping family meals to avoid their judgment. I'd eat alone in my room, headphones on, coding personal projects to keep my skills sharp. One night, I overheard Dad talking to a neighbor at a barbecue. "Samantha's still finding her way," he said, his voice dripping with pity. "Not like James, he's set for life." I stood in the hallway, gripping my phone, my heart sinking. I wasn't finding my way, I was building something, pouring everything into it. Why couldn't they see me? I clung to the hope that a big win at work might change their minds, might make them look at me the way they looked at James. My big chance came when my boss picked me for a client pitch in Albuquerque. Our startup's app was on the cusp of something huge, and this meeting could lock in a deal to keep us afloat. I threw myself into prep, tweaking slides, memorizing stats, testing code until my eyes burned. Late nights at the office became routine, my laptop humming as I rehearsed answers to every question a tech exec might throw at me. "This is your shot, Samantha," my boss said, his voice steady. "Show them what you've got." My stomach churned with nerves, but beneath it was a spark of excitement. This wasn't just a presentation. It was my chance to prove I could make it, not just to the client, but to my family. The night before my flight, I was packing when my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen. "Samantha, we're hosting James's engagement party this weekend," he said, his tone all business. "I need you to handle catering and decorations when you're back." I gripped my suitcase, trying to keep my voice light. "I'm heading to Albuquerque tomorrow for a big pitch. Could be a game changer for my company." He paused, then said, "That's fine, but the party's important. James is counting on us." My heart sank. I wanted to share how much this trip meant, how I'd been working nonstop, but he cut me off. "Just make sure you're ready for the party," he said, then hung up. I stared at my phone, his words stinging. He didn't even ask about the pitch. In Albuquerque, I walked into a glass-walled conference room facing a row of execs in sharp suits. My palms were sweaty, but I launched into the presentation, walking them through our app's features, growth metrics, and user data. Their questions came hard and fast, probing for weaknesses. I answered with numbers, showed a flawless demo, and countered every doubt with confidence I didn't know I had. By the end, they were leaning forward, nodding. "This is exactly what we need," the head exec said, signing a $2 million contract. My boss grinned, clapping my shoulder. "You crushed it, Samantha. This could mean a raise." I felt weightless, like I'd finally done something undeniable. For once, I wasn't just the kid who couldn't measure up. Walking out of that room, I let myself imagine telling my family. Maybe Dad would set aside his spreadsheets, look me in the eye, and say he was proud. Maybe Mom would put down her phone, listen to the details, and smile. Maybe James would stop treating me like a hobbyist and see I was building something real. I stopped at a shop near the hotel, picking out gifts to share the moment: a silver pen for Dad, a silk scarf for Mom, a leather journal for James. They weren't much, but I hoped they'd carry the weight of my win, maybe spark a conversation where they'd finally see me. I texted Mom from the airport, nailed the pitch. Signed a huge deal. No reply came, but I told myself she was busy. I'd share the news at home, make them understand what this meant. On the flight, my mind raced with possibilities. This deal could change everything, not just at work, but at home. I pictured Dad asking about the client, Mom wearing the scarf at the party, James nodding with respect. For years I'd been invisible, my efforts drowned out by their focus on my brother. This contract, this moment, felt like a key to unlock their approval. I clutched the gift bags, rehearsing how I'd tell the story, the exec's questions, my demo, the signatures. I didn't know then that my hopes were built on sand, that the family I was desperate to impress had plans of their own, plans that would hit me like a freight train the moment I stepped off that plane. The rideshare from Des Moines Airport pulled onto my street, the familiar row of houses blurring past as my heart still raced from the Albuquerque win. I clutched my laptop bag, the contract's weight a quiet triumph in my carry-on. Then I saw them, black garbage bags, at least 10, piled sloppily by our front gate. My clothes, books, and keepsakes spilled out, handles tied tight like they were trash. My dad stood there, arms crossed, his face hard as granite. James was beside him, his jaw set, eyes cold. I stepped out, my legs unsteady. "What's this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad didn't blink. "You're a burden, Samantha. Time to go." James nodded, his voice sharp. "You're holding us back." My chest tightened, the air sucked out of me. "You packed my stuff while I was gone," I said, staring at the bags, my favorite sweater poking through a tear. "You didn't even tell me." Dad's eyes narrowed. "You're 22. James was on his own years ago." I looked at James, hoping for a crack in his resolve, but he just shrugged. "Grow up, Samantha," he said, turning away. I scanned the gate, the house I'd called home for years, now a wall against me. Mom wasn't there, but her absence screamed louder than words. They'd planned this, waited until I was across the country to rip my life apart. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my throat closed up. "Why now?" I managed, my voice shaking. "Why like this?" Dad stepped forward, his tone final. "We've carried you long enough. You need to figure it out." James crossed his arms, echoing him. "You've had years to get it together." The word burden echoed in my head, each syllable a knife. I'd paid my way, worked late nights, kept their house running, yet here I was, reduced to trash bags. A neighbor slowed as he walked by, his dog tugging at the leash, eyes lingering on the scene. Shame burned my face, but I forced my chin up. I looked at the bags, my life stuffed carelessly inside, and something shifted. Anger flickered, but beneath it was a deeper hurt, raw and heavy. I could have fought, could have begged, but what was the point? They'd made their choice. I grabbed my laptop bag, the only thing they hadn't touched, and walked to my car parked on the street. "You're really doing this?" I asked one last time, my voice steady despite the ache. Dad didn't answer, just turned back to the house. James muttered, "Good luck," his tone empty. I slid into the driver's seat, the gift bags from Albuquerque still in the back, unopened, forgotten like me. I drove away, my hands gripping the wheel, tears blurring the road. The streetlights flickered, each one marking the distance from a home that wasn't mine anymore. My phone buzzed James, probably, or maybe Mom, but I let it ring. What could they say? Now I'd just signed a deal that could change my career. But to them, I was a burden, something to discard. The betrayal wasn't just the bags or the words. It was the years of being unseen, of pouring myself into a family that didn't care. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. The city blurred past familiar streets, turning foreign. My mind raced. Where would I sleep? How would I afford a place? The contract felt like a lifeline, but it couldn't fix this. I thought of calling my boss, explaining, but the thought of admitting this humiliation stopped me. Instead, I pulled into a gas station, the neon lights harsh against the night. I checked my phone, 3 missed calls from James, a text from Mom. "We need to talk when you're ready." Ready? They'd thrown me out without a word, and now they wanted to talk. I shut the phone off my hands, trembling. The hurt settled in heavy and cold, but beneath it was a spark of resolve. They'd made their move, but I wasn't done. I'd built something in Albuquerque, something they couldn't touch. As I pulled back onto the road, the garbage bags faded in my mind, replaced by a quiet determination to prove them wrong, to build a life where I wasn't anyone's burden. I drove aimlessly until my phone lit up with a call from my college friend Kelly Morgan. "Samantha, where are you?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. I choked out the story. My clothes in garbage bags, my dad's cold words, the gate slamming shut on my life. "Come to my place now," she said, no hesitation. I pulled up to her small apartment in Beaverdale, my car stuffed with trash bags, my eyes burning from tears I wouldn't let fall. Kelly opened the door, pulling me into a hug. "You're staying here," she said, clearing space on her couch. That night, I curled up under a borrowed blanket, the weight of being homeless settling in my life, reduced to plastic bags in a corner. Kelly's apartment was cramped. Her roommate out of town, leaving just enough room for me to crash. "We'll figure this out," she said the next morning, handing me coffee. I nodded, but my mind was spinning. My savings were thin, barely $2,000, and Des Moines rents were brutal. I couldn't afford a deposit, let alone first and last month's rent. Kelly didn't push, just sat with me as I scrolled through rental listings, each one a reminder of how little I had. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, squeezing my hand. Her kindness was a lifeline, but the shame of being kicked out clung to me, heavy and raw. At work, I kept my head down, coding through the haze of exhaustion. My boss had emailed about the Albuquerque deal, hinting at a bonus if it launched smoothly. It was a flicker of hope. But it didn't solve my immediate problem: no home, no stability. Ryan Brooks, a designer at my startup, noticed my silence during a team meeting. "You okay?" he asked later, leaning against my desk. I hesitated, then spilled the truth. My family's betrayal, the garbage bags, the couch I was sleeping on. His face softened. "I know a guy who rents studios in Ingersoll," he said. "I'll make some calls." By the next day, he'd connected me with a landlord willing to skip the credit check for a higher deposit. Finding a place wasn't easy. Ryan drove me to see a studio, small with peeling paint and a noisy heater, but it was a start. The rent was $1,000 a month plus a $1,500 deposit. I did the math, my stomach twisting. My savings could cover the deposit, but monthly bills would eat me alive. "It's rough, but it's yours," Ryan said, helping me carry my bags inside for a tour. I signed the lease, my hand shaking, knowing I'd be scraping by. Kelly pitched in, dropping off a thrift store lamp and some dishes. "You're tougher than this," she said, stacking plates in my empty kitchen. I forced a smile, but the reality of starting over hit hard. Money was the biggest hurdle. My paycheck covered basics, rent, groceries, loan payments, but left nothing for emergencies. I didn't have a bed, just an air mattress Kelly lent me. No pots, no towels, no cleaning supplies. I walked to discount stores, buying the cheapest essentials: a $5 frying pan, a pack of secondhand forks. Every purchase felt like a defeat, a reminder of how little I'd been left with. I started meal prepping rice and beans to save cash, learning to cook on a stovetop that barely worked. "You're doing this," Kelly said one night, watching me chop vegetables. I nodded, but the fear of falling behind lingered, my bank account a constant ticking clock. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into the Albuquerque project, coding late to ensure we met deadlines. My boss noticed, pulling me aside. "You're carrying this team," he said, his words a small balm for the hurt I carried. But the long hours meant less time to settle in to make the studio feel like home. I'd come back to my bare apartment, the air mattress sagging under me, and stare at the ceiling, replaying my dad's words. "You're a burden." I wasn't, but the sting of it drove me to keep going, to prove I could stand alone. Ryan checked in often, texting me listings for cheap furniture or offering to grab coffee. "You don't have to go through this by yourself," he said one day, handing me a used chair from his friend's garage. His support alongside Kelly's kept me grounded. They didn't judge, didn't pry, just showed up. I started learning small skills: how to fix a leaky faucet, how to budget every dollar. Each step felt like a victory, proof I wasn't the failure my family saw. But the hurt was still there, a quiet ache that flared when my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Can we talk?" I ignored it, not ready to face her. By the second week, the studio was functional, bare but mine. I hung a thrift store curtain, set up a folding table for my laptop. I wasn't thriving, but I was surviving, building a life from scratch. Kelly threw a small pizza night with a few friends, their laughter filling the empty space. "You're making it," she said, raising a slice. I smiled, but inside I was still raw, the betrayal of being discarded lingering. I didn't know then that a bigger blow was coming, one that would reveal just how far my family had gone, to cut me out, pushing me to fight for what was mine. 2 weeks after I'd settled into my bare studio, my phone buzzed with a notification from a local real estate site. A listing caught my eye, a familiar address, our family home marked under contract for $750,000. My heart stopped. The description bragged about a quick sale to fund a family venture. I scrolled, my hands trembling, and saw the realtor's note: sellers eager to support son's tech startup. It hit me like a punch. They were selling the house to bankroll James's app, and I'd been left out of the decision, my share of the inheritance erased. I pulled up an old email from our family lawyer, sent years ago after Dad's will was finalized. It stated clearly the house was to be split equally between me and James. My claim was undeniable, yet they'd moved forward without a word. I called the realtor, a woman who'd known our family for years. "Samantha, I thought you were aware," she said, her voice uneasy. "Your dad signed the papers 10 days ago. The buyers want to close fast." I gripped my phone, my voice shaking. "They didn't tell me. They cut me out." She stammered, "I assumed you'd agreed." "I'm so sorry." Sorry didn't change the fact that they'd planned this while I was scrambling to rebuild my life. I drove to a quiet cafe, the clink of dishes steadying my nerves, and called my dad. "You're selling the house," I said, my voice sharp. Without telling me, he didn't flinch. "It's for James's startup, Samantha. A real opportunity." I laughed, bitter and raw. "An opportunity? You took my inheritance for his app." His tone hardened. "You've never contributed like James. This is for the family's future." I pushed back, my anger rising. "Dad's will gave me half. You had no right." He cut me off. "The deal's done. Stop making this difficult." He hung up, leaving me staring at my coffee, the betrayal sinking in like a stone. I tried my mom next, hoping for some shred of regret. "Why didn't you tell me about the house?" I asked when she answered. Her voice was cold, dismissive. "James needs this, Samantha. You'll manage." I clenched my fist, fighting the urge to yell. "Manage? You sold my share without asking me." She sighed, like I was a burden all over again. "We made a choice. Don't drag this out." I ended the call, my chest tight with fury. They hadn't just kicked me out, they'd stolen my future, betting it all on James's gamble. James was my last hope. I texted him, "You knew about Dad's will. Why let them cut me out?" His reply was instant sharp. "My startup's bigger than your drama, Samantha. Move on." I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. "You're taking what's mine," I typed back. "This isn't fair." He responded with a shrug emoji as if my loss was a joke. I tossed my phone onto the table, the cafe's hum fading as the truth settled. They'd conspired to sell the house knowing I'd fight back if I'd been told, and chose to leave me with nothing. I reopened the realtor's email, rereading the sale details. The buyers, a couple with kids, had offered cash for a quick close, and my dad had jumped at it to fund James's app development. I remembered snippets of conversations, Dad praising James's vision, Mom nodding along, but I'd never imagined they'd go this far. The house was more than property. It was my dad's legacy, my safety net, my right. They'd sold it assuming I'd stay silent, that I'd fade away after they'd discarded me. Part of me wanted to call the lawyer, pull up the will, and fight for my share. But the thought of facing their cold dismissal again, of dragging this through legal battles, felt like another wound. Their betrayal wasn't just about money. It was a message that I didn't matter, that James's dreams were worth more than my place in the family. I sat in the cafe, my coffee untouched, my resolve hardening. A month into my new life, work became my lifeline. I poured everything into our startup's app, coding late into the night to push our latest update live. The Albuquerque deal was paying off, user numbers were climbing, and my boss called me into his office one morning. "Samantha, your work's been stellar," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We're promoting you to lead developer with a 15% raise." I stood there, stunned, the words sinking in. The extra money, about $500 a month, meant I could breathe easier, maybe even save a little. "You've earned it," he added, shaking my hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was more than the girl my family had discarded. Back at my studio, I was learning to stand on my own. My budget was still tight, so I taught myself to stretch every dollar. I scoured YouTube tutorials, mastering quick meals like stir-fry or pasta with cheap ingredients from the corner store. One night, I burned a batch of chicken, filling the place with smoke, but I laughed it off, my first real laugh in weeks. I figured out how to fix a wobbly table leg with a screwdriver, a small win that felt huge. Kelly stopped by, noticing the changes. "You're turning this place into something," she said, eyeing my thrift store shelves. I nodded, feeling a flicker of pride, but the hurt from my family's betrayal still lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. Therapy was my next step. Ryan had suggested it, texting me a link to a counselor covered by our company's insurance. "It helped my sister," he said, his tone gentle. I booked a session with Dr. Ellen Ward, a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Sitting in her quiet office, I spilled everything: the garbage bags, the stolen inheritance, the years of being invisible. "Your family's actions weren't about you," Dr. Ward said, her voice calm but firm. "They were about their own priorities." She helped me name the pain, betrayal, rejection, and taught me to set boundaries, to stop seeking approval from people who'd never give it. Each session peeled back layers, making the hurt less raw, though it never fully faded. Work wasn't just about money, it was my anchor. I led a team of 3 coders, now pitching new features and streamlining our app's backend. During a client call, I proposed a search algorithm that cut load times in half. The client loved it, and my boss emailed the team, "Samantha's driving our success." I saved that email, a reminder I was building something real. But late nights at the office meant little time for myself, and the studio still felt empty, its bare walls a mirror of the void my family left. Dr. Ward pushed me to fill that space with new connections, to let people in. I started small, joining a local coding meetup. There, I met Lisa Hayes, a bubbly graphic designer who loved bad puns and coffee as much as I did. "You're the app girl, right?" she said at our first meetup, grinning as we bonded over debugging horror stories. We started grabbing lunch, her easy laughter pulling me out of my shell. Lisa invited me to a trivia night where I met other young professionals, people who didn't know my past who saw me as Samantha, not the family failure. For the first time, I felt like I could belong somewhere new. Ryan and I grew closer too. He'd swing by my desk with a coffee or a joke, his quiet support a constant in my chaotic new life. One evening, he asked me to grab drinks after work. Just us, he said, his smile shy but warm. We ended up at a dive bar talking for hours about our startup's quirks, his love for sketching my secret obsession with sci-fi novels. "You're stronger than you know," he said, his eyes steady on mine. My heart skipped a spark I hadn't felt in ages. We started hanging out more movie nights, walks by the river, each moment easing the weight of my past. It wasn't love yet, but it was a start, a chance to let someone in. Dr. Ward's sessions gave me tools to rebuild. She taught me to journal, to write down the anger and let it go. One night, I wrote about my dad's cold dismissal, my mom's silence, James's smug texts. Tearing up the page felt like shedding their hold on me. I learned to say no to things that drained me, like answering my mom's occasional texts, vague, guilt-laced messages I deleted unread. "You're reclaiming your space," Dr. Ward said, and I clung to that. I wasn't healed, but I was moving forward one small step at a time. Lisa threw a small gathering at her place, inviting me and a few others from the meetup. We laughed over board games, the room warm with chatter. Ryan showed up bringing a sketch he'd done of my studio's balcony. "Thought it'd brighten the place," he said, handing it to me. I blushed, tucking it away, my heart lighter than it had been in months. These people, Lisa, Ryan, my new co-workers, were becoming my chosen family, proof I didn't need my old one to thrive. The pain of their betrayal still stung, but it was fading, replaced by a quiet strength I was only beginning to understand. 3 months into my new life, I was deep in a marathon coding session, leading my team through a critical app update. My phone stayed on silent, buried in my bag as we debugged code and prepped for a client demo. By late afternoon, the update was live and I collapsed into my chair, exhausted but proud. I grabbed my phone to text Ryan, only to freeze. 44 missed calls from my mom stacked across the day, and one text: "Samantha, we need you. Please call." My stomach churned. I'd ignored their messages for weeks, but this many calls screamed desperation. Something was wrong, and despite everything, I needed to know what. I stepped outside the office, the evening air cool against my skin, and dialed my mom. Her voice answered, shaky and rushed. "Samantha, thank God. James's startup failed. We lost everything, the house money, our savings." I gripped my phone, my heart racing. "Lost everything," I said, my tone sharp. "And you're calling me now?" She stumbled over her words, pleading. "Your dad didn't want to call, but we're in trouble. We need your help." Before I could respond, she said, "Hold on, he's here." There was a rustle. Then my dad's voice came on, gruff and defensive. "Samantha, we're family. We're struggling." I laughed, cold and bitter, the hurt rushing back. "Family? You threw me out, sold my inheritance for James's app, and now you need me." My dad's tone hardened. "That was for the family's future. James's startup was a sure thing until it wasn't." I cut him off, my voice rising. "You cut me out, Dad. You didn't even tell me." He sighed like I was the problem. "We're in debt now. You've got a job, Samantha. Help us out." I stood frozen, the weight of their betrayal heavy. "You made your choice," I said. "I'm not fixing your mess." He started to argue, but I hung up, my hands shaking. Back in my studio, I sat on my couch staring at the call log, 44 calls, relentless, starting at 6 a.m. My mom's text sat there, a plea I didn't trust. I called Kelly, needing her perspective. "They're begging now," I said, my voice tight. "James's startup tanked and they want my help." She snorted, setting down her coffee. "After what they did, you don't owe them a dime." I nodded, her words echoing Dr. Ward's advice about protecting my peace. I'd fought too hard to rebuild my job, my home, my life, to let their chaos pull me back. Curiosity drove me to my laptop. I searched for James's startup, finding a news article on a tech site. His app, touted as a revolutionary platform, had collapsed when investors bailed after a competitor's launch. The house sale, $750,000, had been their only cushion, now gone. My parents were stuck in a cheap rental, drowning in debt. James had posted on social media vague and bitter rough times, but I'll bounce back. I felt a flicker of pity, quickly snuffed out. They'd gambled on his dream, cut me out, and now faced the fallout. Ryan came over that night, sensing my unease. "Your parents again?" he asked, sitting beside me. I showed him the call log, the text. 44 calls, like I'm their lifeline. He shook his head, his hand on mine. "You've built something real here. Don't let them take it." His words grounded me, a reminder of the life I'd carved out. Dr. Ward had taught me to choose myself, to let go of people who didn't value me. My parents' desperation wasn't my burden, they'd made their bed. I opened my phone, my finger hovering over my mom's number. Part of me wanted to call back to see if they'd admit their wrongs, but their voices, my mom's pleas, my dad's defensiveness rang hollow. They hadn't apologized, hadn't owned the pain they'd caused. Their calls were about survival, not remorse. I selected my mom's number and hit block. Then my dad's. Then James's, whose only text was a curt "Call Mom." The screen went dark, and a quiet relief washed over me. I wasn't their savior, not after they'd discarded me. Lisa texted me later, checking in about our next meetup. "You good?" she wrote, adding a heart emoji. I smiled, feeling lighter. My life. Ryan's support, Kelly's loyalty, Lisa's friendship was mine, built on my terms. My family's collapse was their own doing, not my responsibility. As I locked my phone, a new strength settled in. I'd closed the door on them, not out of anger, but clarity. I was free to keep building, to live for myself. 6 months after I'd cut ties, I stood in a small condo in Ingersoll, keys jingling in my hand. I'd saved every extra dollar from my raise, scraped together a down payment, and signed the papers for my first real home. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with a tiny balcony and creaky floors, but it was mine, a space I'd built without my family's shadow. I spent weekends painting the walls, a soft blue, hanging shelves, with Kelly's help, and arranging secondhand furniture Ryan had scouted with me. "This place is you," Kelly said, hammering a nail for my thrift store mirror. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't known in years, a sense of freedom that came from owning my space. My life was falling into place. Kelly came over, often bringing takeout or her latest playlist, turning my condo into a hub of laughter. Ryan was a constant now, our relationship deepening with every shared moment, cooking dinners, binge-watching sci-fi shows, or just talking late into the night. "You're making this work?" he said one evening, sprawled on my couch, his sketchbook open to a drawing of my balcony. I leaned against him, my heart full. Lisa joined us for game nights, her bad puns sparking roars of laughter. My new coworker, Tom Carter, a quiet IT guy, started dropping by too, bringing homemade cookies that became our group's obsession. These people, Kelly, Ryan, Lisa, Tom, were my chosen family, filling my home with life. I threw a housewarming party, a small gathering with pizza and music. Kelly strung fairy lights across the balcony, and Ryan set up a makeshift bar with cheap wine. Lisa led a toast, raising her glass. "To Samantha, who built this from nothing," she said, her grin wide. Everyone cheered, and I felt a rush of pride. My condo wasn't perfect, wobbly shelves, a leaky sink, but it was a testament to my resilience, a space where I belonged. Tom shyly handed me a potted plant, saying, "For your balcony." I hugged him, my eyes stinging with gratitude. This was happiness, not borrowed or conditional, but mine. Work was thriving too. My role as lead developer had me guiding bigger projects, my ideas shaping our app's future. A recent update I'd spearheaded boosted downloads by 20%, earning a shout-out in a company newsletter. "You're killing it," Ryan said, reading it over my shoulder. I smiled, but the real victory was knowing I'd done it without my family's approval. They'd never seen my worth, but I didn't need them to. My team, my friends, my life, they saw me, and that was enough. I'd heard whispers about my family's downfall through a mutual acquaintance, a neighbor from our old street. My dad and mom were renting a cramped apartment in a rundown part of Des Moines, their savings drained by James's failed startup. The $750,000 from the house sale had vanished, sunk into a venture that never took off. James, once so smug, had lost his job, his app buried by competitors. The neighbor mentioned seeing him at a coffee shop taking shifts as a barista, his confidence gone. I didn't gloat, there was no joy in their struggle, but I felt no guilt either. They'd made their choices betting on James and cutting me out. Now they lived with the consequences. My phone stayed quiet, no calls or texts from them since I'd blocked their numbers. I didn't check, didn't wonder. Dr. Ward's words rang true. My peace was mine to protect. I'd spent too long chasing their approval, only to learn it was never coming. My condo, my friends, my work, they were proof I didn't need it. One night, Ryan and I sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling below. "You're home," he said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, the weight of my past gone. This was my life now, built from the ground up, and I was finally free. A year after I walked away, I stood in my condo, sunlight streaming through the balcony doors, and realized I'd built a life that was truly mine. The journey hadn't been easy, starting from nothing, clawing my way to independence, but it taught me who I am. Self-reliance became my backbone, not just in paying bills or fixing a leaky sink, but in trusting my own choices. I'd stopped chasing the approval of a family that never valued me, choosing, instead, to live for my passions, coding, creating, building something real. That shift, that freedom to be myself, was the hardest lesson and the most rewarding. I started a blog to share my story, not for pity, but to reach others who felt trapped by family or circumstance. My first post, titled "Starting Over at 22, poured out the raw truth: being kicked out, losing my inheritance, finding my way. I wrote about the late nights coding to keep my job, the friends who became my anchor, the therapy that helped me heal. The response was overwhelming. Comments from strangers like Sarah Lee, a college student who'd cut ties with her own toxic family. "Your story gave me courage," she wrote. I replied, my heart full. "You've got this." Sharing my journey wasn't just cathartic, it was a way to light a path for others. I spoke at a local tech meetup, invited by Lisa to talk about resilience. Standing before a small crowd, I shared how I turned betrayal into strength, how I built a career and a home without my family's support. "You don't need anyone's permission to thrive," I said, my voice steady. The room clapped, and a woman approached me, after eyes bright. "I'm starting over too," she said, shaking my hand. "Thank you." Kelly in the back gave me a thumbs up, her grin wide. Ryan squeezed my shoulder, whispering, "You're incredible." Their pride, their belief in me, was worth more than any nod my family never gave. My days were full now, not with the chaos of my past, but with purpose. At work, I led projects that shaped our app's future, my ideas driving growth. Off hours, I cooked dinners with Ryan, laughed at Lisa's puns, or debated tech trends with Tom. My condo was a haven, books on shelves, plants on the balcony, photos of my new life pinned to a corkboard. I'd learned to love the quiet moments, like sipping coffee in the morning, knowing I'd built this piece from scratch. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was mine. My family was a distant memory, their absence a relief. I'd heard through a former neighbor that my dad and mom were still in their rundown rental, scraping by on odd jobs. James, once so sure of his startup, was bouncing between low-paying gigs, his dreams buried under debt. They hadn't reached out since I'd blocked their numbers, and I didn't check. Their choices, their betrayal, Their gamble had led them there. I didn't wish them harm, but I didn't carry their weight anymore. My life was my own, free from their shadow. One evening I sat with Ryan on my balcony, the city humming below. "You've come so far," he said, his hand warm in mine. I nodded, a quiet smile spreading. I didn't think I could. Kelly joined us, bringing wine and stories, and we laughed until the stars came out. Later, I posted another blog entry reflecting on what I'd learned. Self-reliance isn't just surviving, it's choosing yourself every day. If you're starting over, I wrote, know that your story matters. Keep going. The comments poured in, voices from strangers who'd found hope in my words. I closed my laptop, my heart steady, my peace complete. I was home.